Okay, so today the first stitch that we're going to learn is called an X stitch or a cross stitch. We also use it for hemming, but there are several different types of hem stitch. So I don't call it just a hem stitch because there's a couple of different kinds. I call this one an X stitch or cross stitch. I'm going to show you how to do it through this one layer of fabric and then how to do it like you were doing a hem on a pair of pants or a skirt. So the way that we start this out is just to take a tiny stitch so that we can get the thread attached. And this is, of course, just a regular loaded up thread that we've already figured out how to do from last time. And what I want to do is, you can see through this well enough to see that my hand is back there. And this is really important for this stitch because you need to be able to feel when the needle goes through the fabric. So you can see that my finger is back there. What I want to do is take just a very tiny stitch right here. I'm going up a little bit, about a 45-degree angle. Tiny stitch. And the way that I know that the stitch is going to be small is that as soon as I feel it poke my finger, then I'm going to come back out. I'm then going to go back down here and do another very tiny stitch. If you look at this very close up, you can see I'm only catching a couple of threads here. Pull that through. I'm going to go back up, just a couple of threads, and go back. And you can see that even though this isn't an X in a very traditional, very obviously crossed over way, that there is crossover that happens here at your points. So it is forming an X in a way. I'm going to go back down here, catch a couple of threads, and go back up. And keep going back and forth like this. What I want to do now is show you how to do this if you're using it as a hem stitch on a regular hem. So I'm just going to cut my thread real quick and put a new knot in it so that I can show you how this is done on a folded up piece of fabric like you would have if you were hemming a skirt or a pair of pants or something, you know, whatever you need to put a hem into. It's easier to demonstrate the stitch by itself at first so that you can see what it looks like when it's plain. So I've just taken this fabric and rolled it a couple of times to imitate what a hem would look like if we pretend that this is the bottom of a pair of pants or a skirt. The first thing that I'm going to do is take my thread and put it inside this fold. Let me pull that through so that you can see where I have folded the fabric that the thread is coming from the top of that. That means that the knot is inside. So the knot's hidden out of the way so that it's not visible and you don't have to deal with it. Now you can see once again, I have my hand on the back of this. So I'm going to poke it through and do that little bitty knot or the little bitty stitch, just a couple of threads like we did on the other sample. And then I'm going to come down into this fold again and pull through here. So it's going through the top like that and coming back out. Then going over a little bit, stab yourself in the finger and pull that back through so that you're only catching a couple of threads. And then go into the fold as close to the fold as you can. You don't want to take this stitch and make it like down here somewhere. You want to take it and make it into where that fold is. So once again, even though it's an X, it's a very flattened out X. So we can use this for hems. In terms of how big to make this stitch, what I always tell people in class is the idea that for costuming purposes, if we're using this for a hem and somebody sticks their foot in like it's a pair of pants, you don't want them to get caught here. You don't want it, you don't want them to get their toes stuck in the hem. You don't want to have a really big stitch that way, because if you if you get your fingers or your toes caught in the stitching, if it's too big, it's going to rip your hem out. And so, you're going to have to fix it. So make the stitches small enough that you don't have to worry about someone getting their fingers or toes accidentally catching what's happening there in the stitches. So, you want them to be no further apart than maybe an inch at most, so that you don't have to worry about it. But you see that this is making a flattened X here. And you can look on this side and you'll see that there is very small stitching on this side, because as soon as I feel it come through and hit me in the finger, I complete the stitch and go back to the other side. If the thread was the same color as the fabric, this stitch would basically disappear. And so that's what you want for your hem, right? You don't want it to be really noticeable. So these tiny stitches, if they are with the same color thread, will blend in really well and make the hem not visible to people. But you want to keep going with this and make that X happen. The other thing that this does, and you're like, well, why don't we just do a regular stitch, but just not make it show as much on the outside. The X stitch gives you a little bit of flexibility within the hem, and I'm going to probably have to unthread this to show you. This will wiggle a little bit. There's a little bit of wiggle. See how that's scooting back and forth a little bit? That makes it a little bit more user-friendly. It means that there's some flexibility if the hem is not the exact same size as the outer layer, or if there's a lot of movement with the garment. It makes it so that this can scoot back and forth. And of course, if you're just sewing it down normally, you're not going to have that flexibility. So this is the X stitch or cross stitch. Remember to label your sample and put your name on it. And so this is the next sample that we do. This is the third sample of the hand sewing.